So my name is Andrea Hermit, and I started homeschooling in, I don't remember if it was 2003 or 2002. So you can do the math. I don't remember how long that was. How long have you guys been homeschooling? A couple months. No? Over a decade. What about your back? Cool. So I graduated my baby in, I don't remember, I think I graduated Jordan in 2013. She was 16. What she said? She was 16, and she turned 17 that summer before she started college. And then she has a brother who was 2 years older than her that graduated 1 year ahead of her. They tend to speed up if they have older siblings. And so that worked out really well for me. And so as we approached those last years of homeschooling my children, I started running out of steam. I just got tired. But even though I was tired, I was very excited for my kids. But all the families around us were saying, why aren't you crying yet? Aren't you upset that it's almost over? What are you gonna do? And I was like, I'm excited. And not just excited to be left alone, but excited to see what they were going to do next. And I graduated her, I wandered off into homeschool veteran land, found my niche in the outside world in community theater, and then some community theater people dragged me back into homeschooling. And so here I am at the intersection between homeschooling and theater, which is a really kind of neat place to be. So let's start at the beginning. So in the beginning, I homeschooled because I had to. High energy daughter who everyone suspected was ADHD, and a son who no one would admit was gifted until the school finally said, you can't have her here if she's not on Ritalin. And I said, and so they tried to prescribe me Ritalin, and I was like, no, you don't understand. I just won't have her here. That works for me. And then he came up and he said, so mommy, here's some programs, and this is how you're gonna homeschool me. And I was like, who's this tall? And I was like, Jack, whatever. So I ended up homeschooling these two little precocious kids, a little girl who was swinging from the rafters, and a little boy who was walking around telling all of us how to behave. And it was just a really cool journey. I very quickly found a community because everyone said, she belongs on stage. Get her on stage. Disney rejected her and wanted him. He wanted no part of that. So we joined a homeschool program that was high theater. And that's kind of where we stayed for the entire journey. But as they got older and closer to my height and more outspoken, it just became real apparent that I needed to shift the way I was doing some things. I needed to get real serious about the end goal. That shift came when they would look at me dead in the eye when they were my height, and I'd say, do this, and they'd go, oh, sure, I'll get that done right away. Nope, it wasn't getting done. And so that program they were in at the time didn't only have an arts day, they also had an academic day. So I made the decision that I could keep that very gentle parenting way I had about me, and my gentle parenting philosophy is not today's gentle parenting philosophy. Don't stress them out if you don't have to, right? I wanted to keep that about me, so I chose to make someone else the bad guy for a couple of years. And so they did academic classes with other kids. And after 2 years of that, they came back and said, we're ahead of everybody else, can we go back to you teaching? And so that made my life easier because they saw that they were losing something at that point by me not teaching them. Thank goodness for wise children, I guess. So, but that shift, I don't like this mic. That shift came in several ways. First, I had to make a plan for each child individually. And I walked around them. I knew who they were, but I was always, like once a month, I'd pull them aside and say, what are you gonna do? And they're like, we had this conversation. I'm like, we're just gonna keep having it until we solidify. And it morphed, but it didn't morph that much. And by the time they were 12, 13, I had a pretty clear picture of who they were. And not just from what they said, but things they did. How late they slept, how they read, what they watched, and just how they engaged in the world. So I was pretty clear that I had a web developer on my hands and an artist. And someone talked my son into being a graphic designer, and we wasted a lot of money in the first year of college for him to go, nah, I'm a web developer. And so we ended up back in the less expensive college. The first college had a really good scholarship, but the second college was still way cheaper. And it was just real apparent from day one that Jordan, my daughter, was either gonna go in the front door of the theater and be an actress, or the back door of the theater and be a theater tech. She's never worked for anyone. She is 29. She makes her living making costumes for theaters all over Atlanta and Gwinnett County. And she's my theater tech teacher, and she acts all throughout Gwinnett. And he is a web developer. AI kinda upended his career a year ago. And so he's been studying AI, and now the company he used to work for that could no longer afford him just sends him those contracts directly. So now he's on the self-employed route. The point of that is just keep talking to your kids, keep looking at what they do, keep looking at what they read, what they watch, and what their friends' parents say about them, and what people at your homeschool co-op or things like that say about him. Because he came to me and said, I was writing for an online website, and I had to write in HTML, which is you're designing the page as you're writing it in code. I don't even know how I learned it, but I did. And he came up and said, show me how to do that. And I showed him how to do that. And then 2 weeks later, he's playing football at a guy's house. And the father's like, I'm a program manager, and that boy is good. He had lapped in a couple of weeks what I had already shown him. And so their talents are gonna show up in ways that even if you don't notice, someone else is gonna notice, and they're gonna tell you about your kids. So always keep people around your kids who have the same propensities as your kids, because they have more knowledge about. I can't know everything about acting and designing. I can't know everything about web design. I just happen to have connections that could tell me, wait, this child's talented in that direction. Of course, everyone my daughter ran into said she belongs on the stage. That was easy, but my son was a little bit harder to pinpoint. And so as you're figuring out what your child is supposed to be, now you have ammunition to get them focused. Because middle schoolers and ninth graders will say, I'm not doing this algebra until you explain to me why I have to do this algebra. I don't like it. Make me want to learn it. And so for Jackson, it was like, well, if you want to do web design, then you have to go to college. And if you want to go to college, here's the plan of things you have to accomplish to get in. Same for Jordan. She's like, well, I'm a designer, so I don't need to learn any math after geometry. She was right, but if she wanted a degree, she had to learn Algebra 2. So I lied, and I said, well, Algebra 2 is a prerequisite to geometry. And then when she was done with Algebra 2, I said, you may now have geometry. By the way, I lied, because I'm a really bad liar, so I could only keep it for so long. And so how do you come up with, how do you know what they need to do to meet whatever goal it is? You're looking at what kind of colleges they're gonna go to. Tech careers, tech colleges, right? Anything that's gonna require a master's degree, and we made our son get a master's degree. It's gonna be a liberal arts college. Well, what does a liberal arts college require? 4 math, 4 science, 4 history, 4 language arts. 2 years of foreign language, same language. You can do more, but you have to start there. And then electives, and then arts. And the thing about homeschoolers in the arts is, so if you count that all up, 16, 17, 18, maybe 20 credits, homeschoolers in the arts tend to double those credits. And that looks real good. We did not pay for my daughter's arts bachelor's degree because dance, theater, Shakespeare intensive, all of those things that she did, and she was having fun. I was taking notes and documenting that, because a huge part of this is just walking around behind them with a camera and a notebook and documenting everything they do. And I remember my son going, you're making me not enjoy photography because you're documenting everything I do. And so I just stood back, and then I took his stuff when he was sleeping, and I still documented it. Because you have to. These are the things that's gonna get someone else to pay for their college. I have in front of me, I have 5 copies of a homeschool portfolio checklist if you want. And this basically tells you how to get them into UGA. If it'll get them into UGA, it'll get them into an Ivy. Interestingly, and here's the most important thing you need to know. Ivies and these upper end colleges, I just give you a really strict list, but there's space for customization here. In that my attention span is very short, and I still manage to homeschool children in excellence. Oh, if you go to the Ivy website, what it says is, because back in the day you would type in, what does my homeschooler need to go to the school? And they would say, just what I said, 2442, and then these things. Now it says, they need to meet the basic requirements, they need to do well on the SAT, and then they need to have specialized in something. They need to show off whatever it is about them that is exceptional in a consistent way. So if we had wanted my daughter to go to Ivy, she could have gone in, because at 12, when she was starting high school, she took the key to the costume closet at her homeschool co-op and she kept it. And she costumed every show, right? My son went from, well, his dad is a CIO, so my husband is a CIO. My son went from executive to executive, refining his skills. None of that, but he played piano up through classical. And so all the Ivies are looking for is consistent interest and talent. They want to see that you have chosen a path and consistently stayed with it and excelled in it. There's a fallacy that to get into an Ivy or a top state college, that you have to be a well-rounded person. That is not true. The reason we are mistaken is because they want a well-rounded class. Do you see the difference there? That became real clear to me when we were looking at theater conservatories for my daughter, because they were looking for well-rounded classes. But a well-rounded class to a theater conservatory is, and this is true, a hair blonde-eyed boy, a brunette boy, an Asian kid, a Hispanic kid, a black guy, and a black girl, because they usually recruit under 10 for a class, a theater conservatory. And so if you think of it that way, they're building a team and they have types that they want. And so their point is, in 10 years, when people are looking at the class of, 2014, so right now you'll be looking back at the class of 2014, people who have graduated from that, they want to see someone shining in each area. And so they don't want a well-rounded child, they want that collection of kids to have shined across their program. So your child doesn't have to turn somersaults, get A's in everything, be class president, and put in 1,000 hours of volunteer work. You just have to have an interest and go deep on it. And so, like I said before, I have the bare minimums, I have the recommended course to get them into those harder colleges, but they can technically fall short somewhere. A child who is high math can fall just above average in language arts and history, which I don't allow because I'm a history nerd. A child who is very high verbal, who was gonna get a 790 on the verbal part of the SAT, which my daughter got, a 490 in math and still get a full scholarship, which she did, because she did not care about math. And I sent her in for the SAT, I think the 4th time, and she was sick of me, so she failed it on purpose. So the 3rd score was what we were going with. And it was a super score, but that 4th score was useless because she just sat there. And that's what she thought of that. And kids are gonna do that. They're gonna get sick of our nonsense, which we don't think is nonsense at all, and say, okay, you pushed me too hard. But that still got her, I didn't pay for college. What I paid for were for all of her friends to eat fast food. I gave her a credit card, and that's what she spent the money on. I didn't pay for anything else. So now, we figured out who they are. We've figured out their course. We've gotten them to agree to this course because you have to find agreement with them or they're not gonna do it. They're your height and they don't care. And I think when we start getting that agreement is before they get to our height. Because the most important thing about homeschooling is relationship. So up to 5th and 6th grade, it's all about love and hugs and kisses. I promise you, it is. When your child knows that there's nothing they can do, and they will try things to make you turn away from them, they'll start going, I think I trust this person. And you know, teenage years where they start trusting everybody but you, this is where we shine as homeschoolers. We get that relationship such that by the time that they're our height, they trust what comes out of our mouth. And they trust that we're looking out for their best interest. So at that point, when they get to those preteen years, and now we've got a plan on paper, we put it on the wall and they have to look at it every day, right? Understand that this is for their best interest and they're going to do it. They are. If you don't gain that trust, or if you start homeschooling in a weird place and it's like, my way or the highway, because I said so, they're not gonna put their back into it. So I currently run a homeschool program, middle and high, and a lot of the kids I get come in at middle. That's the reason why programs like mine exist, because you need a bad guy to be harder on the kids than you are being at that age. But if you're lucky enough to get them younger, that time to really love on them and let them know that no matter what they do, you're not gonna turn away. I had 3 rules in my house growing up, and my daughter will recite them to you now. Don't be stupid. That encompasses a lot, right? Don't lie to me, and when you mess up, come get me. That was it. Those were the only rules in my house. Pushed boundaries. She was like, well, is this stupid? Is this really a lie? I was walking behind her going, you should be smitten. Yeah, that was his personality. But work that I did really set me up for them to trust me. And so we have this plan, they're working it. This is in 10th grade, and you're like, oh, this is almost over. What am I gonna do now, right? That's when you have to start self-care, because you will burn out before they finish if you do not. You need permission to step back and do things for yourself. When your kid hits 15, 16, they don't need you watching over them. At this point, they should be pretty self-propelled. You need to be able to go to dinner without them. I think there was one time my kids were having an unlovable day. Daughter said something snarky, and she was always snarky when shows were coming up, when she was about to be in a show. She got a little bristly, and then Jackson was tired of her, and so therefore he was tired of us, and she said something bristly, and then Jackson came up because he had moved down to the basement because he didn't want to share the bathroom with his sister and her cousin. And my husband said, hello. And he said, why are you always talking to me? And my husband and I looked at each other and we were like, Mexican? And we just left. Came back full. And they were like, what was that? And we're like, did you even miss us? But you came back with doggy bags. Okay, it's okay to take care of yourself. I encourage you to schedule spas. I encourage you, like a summer right before the school year starts, to take a staycation at a local hotel. Or refind. If you don't have a hobby, refind it. Find your creative outlets. Journaling, painting, start exercising, start going to any water aerobics program. Start reaching out and refinding your friends, because you'll find that when your children finish high school, you're like, oh, I've abandoned all my friends because my kids were doing different things than theirs were doing. And so you have to refine that. What I did, because I had gained certain skill sets in having kids in theater, because my daughter was on the stage and doing costumes, and my son was in the sound light booth. I wasn't driving all over town. Find something to do in this building, right? Also, don't wear yourself out unnecessarily, right? Had a certain amount of skill sets. And so a friend was like, well, that community theater over there needs a costumer. I went over, I costumed 3 shows, the next thing I know, I was on the board. Community theater, because I had been interacting with theater for I don't even know how many years. And so some of the things that you are doing now do have a shelf life. You're done homeschooling. It's really great resume items, by the way, right? Then there's where I ended up now. After about 8 years on the board of a community theater, ended up back in homeschooling because a bunch of community theater parents wanted to homeschool their kids, right? Year one, I started just teaching history because I had been taught history so horribly. I went to Catholic school and through 8th grade, and the nun's idea of teaching history was open page 90 and transcribe 5 pages. There's nothing more boring than that. And so when it came time to teach my own kids history, I was terrified that I was gonna make them hate history. And that's kind of why I chose the homeschool program I chose, because they taught history and the arts kind of as a unit. And then I was listening and watching, and I was like, history is just a story. So I started writing curriculum. And that first year I started working with other homeschoolers, 10, some year after my daughter graduated college, maybe like for something. Started teaching history with language arts integration because kids weren't reading as much as their parents asked them to read. Kids weren't writing nearly as much as their parents wanted them to write. And they weren't researching at all. They were just going to Wikipedia and copying whatever it said and handing that paper back to their parents. And the years that grew, because we started in the middle of COVID, or we started right before COVID. We started fall of 2019. So we ended up online. And next year we ended up online again because the church we were at wouldn't let us in. And the kids had theater kids, and they were extroverts, and they were emotionally not okay. So we were like, okay, go to this park, because by then we had figured out that if you were outside, it wasn't catching. And we were doing Julius Caesar in the park. And the time we were there, they were always coming to mow the grass. So they learned how to project. We never needed a mic. So we ended up being a homeschooling theater program, which is where we were headed. But I started off teaching history as a story through storytelling, through theatrical side. And then the next year, the parents were like, they won't do math. And I'm like, oh. And so now we teach history with language arts integration, math, hands-on science. And we have clubs, and this year we're doing a full arts program. It took me some years to build it, to get to this point. But this is what life after homeschooling looks like if this is the direction that you want to be. I could have stayed in community theater and been happy there too. I'm a writer, so I could have written. But the things that you're doing now while you're homeschooling your kids, something is going to call to you. And I highly suggest that you listen to that call and follow it to the best of your abilities, because when your kid is graduating, you'll be excited for that child and for what that child is going on to next. And you also won't be mourning your purpose and what's next. And so, do we have any questions or comments or anything like that? Because that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Any questions, comments? I'm done. Thank you so much. It's a 4-year classical cycle: ancient, medieval, early modern, modern, and then I also have American, which is my favorite to teach. I can teach it out of my head. And then I've recently written this because I noticed that history was going away. And so one night I wrote this guide of legacy African American history through literature. So it's like something books and plays that if you read 1 or 2 from each section, these stories, and then study the history behind them, you have a full course. So this is kind of this idea of course kind of thing, but it tells you everything you need. So yes, book, yes. Okay, mess. So this is an introduction to the study of history. This you teach them week 1 and 2 every year, regardless of if they're doing ancient, medieval, early modern, modern, because it tells them how to study it, how to ask questions, how to take notes, to find sources, how to vet your sources, how to find out if your sources are biased or not. And I have published books 1 and 2 of ancient history. The other 6 are locked and loaded. It just takes a long time to lay it out. And I also have book 1 of medieval history in production right now. I expect by Christmas to have all of ancient history done and most of medieval history done. Now I have it all written. I just don't have all the pretty pictures and layout. And my business partner, Mira, will be here soon, does all of that. But it's about fundraising and getting extra people on that. But we can talk, and I can maybe give you a preview copy, and then you can give me some feedback. Yeah. Else? I'm gonna do it if they don't want to. So, whenever you sit down and do math with a preteen, drills first. Don't just jump right into converting fractions to decimals. Start with something they know. So every worksheet at the beginning of that math session might be addition, subtraction, multiplication, percentages, division, whatever. So that familiarity, and then walk it up. And then you hit that subject. They have to warm up to it. So that's my recommendation. Multiplication, I still use my fingers when multiplying, still. If you say to me, what's 6 times 7, I'm gonna go 21, 42. How to get to that answer, and in time, they'll memorize it. Multiplication is the determining factor of how far they're gonna go in math. So be like a Jamaican and recite those multiplication tables. Line and find the rhymes and things like that. Schoolhouse Rock until my children's eyes bled. They still like, I hate Schoolhouse Rock. I'm like, tell me the preamble to the Constitution, right? And if we were in the car, Schoolhouse Rock was on. It was because the multiplication table's there, and that makes it easy too. 7, 9, 11, they're all there. Best recommendation is don't just jump in. Always have warm-up worksheets, and then jump into the subject. Give them a chance to warm up. Duolingo now has dual math, so they can do a little bit of that to warm up also. I love to hate the math curriculum teaching textbooks, but if your children are artistic, they're gonna tempted to use that. Just less threatening, and it's secular, so it keeps coming back around to make sure they remember it. It doesn't get you a 700 or 800 on the SAT though. So if they're having math phobia, I recommend teaching textbook and then spend the summers doing Khan Academy. Never stop math. There's no such thing as a summer break. Thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk. And if you have any questions, you can pull me aside. Okay.